Hello, students. So in this video, we are going to cover the second part of converting between fraction, decimals, and percents. In this video, we are going to talk about how we convert fractions to decimals and fractions to percent. So I'm going to be focusing on the middle section of your handout. If you did not get a handout to fill in for notes, you can always kind of set up this six square grid on your notebook if you haven't already done so. When we convert fractions to decimals or percents, it's a little trickier than before, mainly just because sometimes, depending on what the actual fraction is, we have to take the harder way. There's easy ways to do both of these, but sometimes based on the numbers, we don't really get the option and we have to do it the what I call harder way. So when we convert fractions to decimals, the first thing we're going to look at is I'm going to show you one that's pretty easy, and then I'm going to show you how we can convert 3/5 in two different ways. So when we convert fractions to decimals, remember when we converted decimals to fractions, we were looking at the place value, right? So for the first one, 400ths, if I just think about place value, I know that the hundreds place is going to be the second place in my decimal, right? So 400ths is just going to be 0.04, or we could even say 0.04, because this ends in the hundredth spot. So that one's pretty basic and pretty easy to do. Let's say they don't give us one that has a place value that we know. So let's say, for instance, they give us something like 3/5. So there's two different ways to do it. The first is if we can rewrite an equivalent fraction that has a place value that has hundredths or that has tenths or that has thousands, one of our decimal places, we can just convert the fraction and then write the decimal using the place value. If we don't know what that is, we're going to have to go back to knowing what the line in between numerator and denominator means. And we've talked about how when we convert, when we look at fractions, the line in between numerator and denominator means to divide, right? So 3/5 means 3 divided by 5. So if I was to put that into a long division, it would look something like this: 3 divided by 5. Okay. And in this case, you might be like, well, 5 can't go into 3. You're right. That's the whole point. We're making them into decimals. They're not going to necessarily be whole numbers. So what I have to do is I have to put a decimal point with 0. And now it kind of looks like 5 into 30. Well, 5 goes into 30 6 times, but I need to keep my decimal point in my answer. So that means that 3/5 is just going to be 0.6. Or 6/10 is another way of thinking about it. So if I want to look at it a different way, so that was the long division way. And if you can avoid the long division way at all costs, I would, because I don't like long division. I don't know if you would want to do it either. But sometimes long division is the only way that's possible, and here's why. So 3/5, I can multiply both of these, numerator and denominator, by 2 and make 6/10, right? 6/10, I know as a decimal, the tenths is the first spot after the decimal point. So 6/10 would look like this: 0.6, which is what we just got right here. Okay. But not all denominators are perfect, like whole values. So like 5 could go into 10. We could also write this as something over 100, something over 1,000. But there are other numbers, like let's say 8, 9, and 7, that like they're not necessarily factors of 10, 100, 1,000, all of those different place values. So in those kind of cases, long division is the only way that you can get your decimal. And sometimes decimals are repeating, they go on forever. Like, for example, if we were to do 2/3 or 1/3, we would get a decimal that goes on and on and on forever. And you can just use the ... to represent, or the line above the number to represent a decimal that goes on forever. That's totally fine. But these are kind of the two main ways. So the first is either looking at our place value or converting a fraction, so then we can just convert to our place value, or setting up the long division and solving it that way. Those are the ways that we convert fractions to decimals. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to convert fractions to percents. So sometimes it might be a very standard percent. A very standard fraction. Like, for example, 1/2. Most of us can know that when we take half of something, that's the same thing as 50%. So like 1/2 is the same as 50%. 1/4 is another example. That's 25%. But if it's not very obvious, the way that we're going to put fractions to percents, the first thing you want to do is you want to check the denominator. If you can rewrite the denominator as something over 100, because remember from previously, percent means for each 100. So if you can rewrite the fraction as something over 100, whatever you get as your new numerator, that is going to be the percentage. So for example, 3/25ths, we can rewrite this as something over 100. 25ths can convert as a least common multiple into 100. So we would just have to do times 4, right? 25 times 4 makes 100. So if I convert my numerator, 3 times 4 is 12. So 3/25ths is equivalent to 12 over 100, and 12 over 100 is just 12%. So 3/25ths as a percentage is just going to be 12%. Sometimes though, our denominators that we're given are not necessarily factors of 100, so we can't do this. I'm going to show you how we would do it if we didn't. I'm going to use the same fraction just so you can see how we get the same answer. But like if we had something like the number 6 is not a factor of 100. So if we were converting, something over 6 to a percentage, we would need to use the second way that I'm about to show you. So the second way is we have to put it into a decimal first. Okay, that's probably the easiest thing to do, because once we put it into a decimal, when we put decimals into percent, remember all we have to do is multiply by 100 or move our decimal 2 places forward. So if we convert this to a decimal, then all we have to do is move the decimal 2 places and boom, that's the percent. So the way that I would do this is I need to, if I'm talking about putting this fraction to a decimal, if I didn't remember that I could just rewrite it as something over 100, if I wanted to do the harder way of doing long division, okay, 3 over 25 is the same as 3 divided by 25, which would look something like this. And I'm just going to put a decimal point, and I'm going to put 2 decimals because I just have a feeling that I need both those decimals. So if I was to do this long division, I should end up getting, let's see, 25 can't go into 3, so I'm going to put a 0. 25 can go into 30 one whole time. And my remainder there is going to be 5. 30 minus 25 is 5. And then if I bring down the 0, 25 can go into 50 2 times. And then I don't have a remainder after that, because 25 times 2 is 50. So as a decimal, 3/25ths is 0.12. And if I just move it twice to put it into a percent, that is going to be 12%. Okay, so this is the long way of taking a fraction and putting it into a percent. You have to convert it to a decimal first, move your decimal 2 spots or multiply times 100 to put it into a percent. If it's something like 3/25ths, where the denominator is a multiple of 100, you can easily just rewrite the fraction, and whatever your numerator is, your new numerator, that's going to be your percentage. But for some fractions, that's not going to be the case, and you have to find the decimal and then convert it to a percent. And again, sometimes these percents will still be a decimal. So if you're having a little bit of trouble converting, this is probably the hardest one out of all 6, converting fractions to percents. If you're having a little bit of trouble with this one, please make sure to kind of check in with people at your table or your teacher to make sure you understand this process. Okay, for your practice questions, I actually gave you a lot, but most of them are pretty straightforward. They don't take too much actual calculation. So what you're going to do for your practice questions is you're going to set up a little table. I kind of drew an extra row. You're going to set up a 3 by 4, or you could do a 5 by 3. If you want to label each column decimal, fraction, and percent. And then basically I gave you something. I gave you a decimal, a fraction, or a percent, and I want you to fill in the other 2 that are equivalent to it. So for example, I'm giving you the decimal 52.5. So I want you to tell me, what would that be as a fraction? What would that be as a percent? I gave you 1/4. I want you to tell me those. I gave you 862%. What would that be? And I numbered each of the missing things that you have to fill in, numbers 1 through 8. So that way, when you check your answers on the table of contents, you can check, each particular section that I'm referring to in the practice questions. So if you have any questions, this is a 6, by the way. I feel like my 6s never look very good. If you have any questions, make sure to ask your teacher, double check the table of contents to check your practice question answers. And I will see you guys soon. Have a great day. Goodbye.